Welcome, everyone. I'm Debbie Himmelfarb, Director of Daytime Programs here at 92Y Tribeca. The reason I'm on a mic, and I want to let you all know, is that we're actually taping this for the 92Y website. We have a YouTube channel. They do a lot of it uptown. They put them on this YouTube channel. So they like our programs, too, and they're going to start putting some of ours on. So it means nothing to you. You don't have to worry about anything. But one request, if you would like to ask a question in the Q&A part, I would like to request you have one of two options. One option is to come up and use the mic so that everybody in the recording can hear you. If you'd rather not do that, you can just yell out your question at the right time. Well, not yell it out, but one of them will call on you, and then Randy or Jane will repeat your question. So it's totally whatever's comfortable for you when we get to Q&A. Okay. But now we're going here to talk about ethics. I'd like to introduce first our moderator. Jane Eisner is a pioneer in journalism. She became editor-in-chief of The Forward in '08, the first woman to hold the position at that influential Jewish national weekly newspaper. By the way, we have copies of The Forward. Please take one on your way out. And Jane informed me that actually in this issue there's a review of Randy's new book. I assume it's a very good review, but we'll see.
Yeah, it better be.
It better be. It better be. So please.
We will get to that.
We'll get to that. Under Jane's leadership, The Forward has won numerous awards for its original journalism in print and online. Jane also teaches journalism and nonfiction writing at Wesleyan and was an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania Political Science Department. And, if that were not enough, she's an author, too, of Taking Back the Vote, Getting American Youth Involved in Our Democracy. Quite relevant right now. And Randy Cohen. Randy wrote humor pieces for newspapers and magazines, including The New Yorker, Harper's, and The Atlantic. And he was a staff writer for several TV shows, including Late Night with David Letterman, for which he won 4 Emmys, but he told me actually 5. One was a technical error. Is that
Something
correct?
like that.
It's not a big deal. So he won between 4 and 5 Emmys, which is impressive enough. He's currently the creator and co-host of Person, Place, Thing, a public radio program produced by WAMC. And he's probably best known, or certainly well known, as the original writer of The Ethicist for the New York Times Magazine. I'm sure everybody read Randy there. And today he's going to talk about how what he learned and how both he and the moral landscape changed during the 12 years that he was in that position. And this conversation coincides with the publication of Randy's new book, Be Good, How to Navigate the Ethics of Everything. That's kind of a narrow topic.
Everything.
The book is very, very interesting, for sale right outside. If you'd like to purchase a copy afterwards, Randy will be happy to sign for you. So we're going to do some conversation, then we're going to open to questions. But in the meantime, thank you for coming. And Jane and Randy, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you all for coming inside on such a beautiful day. We almost played hooky and sent everybody to the park, but we hope that this will be at least an illuminating and enjoyable conversation. I highly recommend reading the book, even though I'm sure many of you, like I have, read the columns that Randy wrote over the many years, but there's something really special about seeing them pulled together in this book.
And there's more stuff, you know, there's more stuff.
There's more stuff. There's more stuff.
There's $1 hidden in some copy.
So we're going to talk ourselves for a while, and then we will open up the floor to your questions and comments. Randy, I thought we could first start by just asking you to define ethics. How do you define it?
I define ethics as the effect of our actions on other people. And there are a couple things there. First, ethics is a social transaction. There can be solitary sin that you can sit alone at home in your apartment and covet your neighbor's ox. But that's not unethical. If you want to do something unethical, you actually have to get up, get dressed, leave the house, and go try to steal the ox. It's really exhausting. Sin is much easier. I personally recommend it. So it's two things. It's that ethics is a social transaction involving other people, and that ethics is active. It's what we do, not just what we think. So
in that framework, it struck me as I was reading so many of the questions that are in this book, and it's cool because they're sort of collected according to subject matter, like sports and technology and different things like that. And it seems that so much of it's sort of boils down to good manners.
Well, you apparently grew up in a more polite house than mine.
Or maybe an aspiringly good. But I do want to talk about that for a minute. I mean, so much of what you discuss in this framework of ethics being how we treat one another, really, can be defined in a certain way on the rules that we all were either taught or absorbed about good manners. And is there a difference, do you think?
Yeah, I'd make a distinction between ethics and etiquette. And one way to see it is much of etiquette concerns gestures that don't actually affect anyone else. Like what fork you use at a fancy dinner. I'm sure you all eat all the time. I myself have 9 or 10 forks on the table every night. I don't know what I'm doing. But so that kind of decision, or to whom should I tip my hat? How deeply should I bow? That kind of etiquette, I would make a distinction between that and ethics. That's not ethics. It has no significant effect on others. Things that we learn just as etiquette, like give your seat on the subway to someone who needs it, someone who's frail, someone who's ill, someone who's carrying a lot of packages. I think that rises to the standard of ethics because it has an actual effect on the well-being of other people.
So
scale, it's small scale. It's still small scale. In one sense, etiquette is the smallest scale ethics, and politics is ethics on the grandest scale.
Because it does seem to me that there's a lot of manners that goes beyond, which fork do you use or to whom do you tip your hat, but how do you listen and respect and treat other people? And it just seems that a lot of the dilemmas that you flesh out in your work, are about that sort of seeing the other person as someone who is human and worthy of respect.
Well, that what you just said, it seems to me is a fundamental moral principle that I am not the only person in the universe. There are other people present too, and they're entitled to be treated with the same dignity and respect that I am. Well, if you make that a fundamental moral precept, and I do, that takes you really far. I mean, first of all, it takes you to a bedrock belief in an egalitarian society. Distinctions of race and gender cannot be applied. Everyone's entitled to be treated equally in that way. And that assumption is also built into the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights that they got 196 countries to sign. I mean, maybe because they know we don't actually have to do this stuff. No. But it's not trivial that people sign on to such a value, that they endorse that value, because then it becomes the basis for discussion. And you can start to challenge people's conduct if you can say, well, but you said you believe X, and how does this flow from that? It's a nice place to start.
So part of this is how we treat one another. But then what happens when we don't treat someone well?
Well, sometimes the cops show up.
Oh, that's true.
It's so ugly.
But, obviously, for those of us observing the Jewish calendar, this is the time of year when we think, or we are supposed to be thinking, not just about the sins that we did in the privacy of our home, but also the ways in which we did not treat other people well. And we're supposed to go farther. I mean, true tshuva, true repentance is actually entails a genuine apology. So what role does apologizing have in ethics?
I would say nearly none. That apologizing may lead you to do the right thing, but of itself, it's kind of morally neutral, except unless it generates action, that you treat the other person differently. That the apology in itself, I don't think it has a lot of moral significance. I don't, if you've done me wrong, I really don't care about your apology one way or the other, frankly, unless it is a condensed version of two things, that you yourself genuinely recognize that you've done wrong and wish to act differently in future. That I care about. I mean, you needn't apologize in order to do that. You could actually just start, treating me a little better, Jane. So I grant that the apology is a useful step down that road for many of us, but in itself, I don't think it's morally significant.
But does it have a usefulness, a worthiness in terms of a kind of preemptive action? I mean, if I had to really, really apologize to you for all the things that I did wrong this year, maybe it would stop me. I know. Maybe it might stop me from doing them. I mean, in the same way that we have laws that hopefully restrain behavior.
I'm a little skeptical of that, that as something that will restrain people. Why? Because the act of apologizing is just so awkward socially that it's so embarrassing. Anything to avoid doing that again. There are also many, many different kinds of apologies. I mean, we see it in public political apologies. My favorite fake apology is if I have offended anyone, it's like, that's just like not acknowledging wrongdoing. It's like if you're so like hypersensitive that my punching you like somehow offended you. Well, yeah, all right, fine, I'm sorry. That kind of apology doesn't acknowledge wrongdoing. Or people will say, my intent was not to do harm. Well, no, it was just to rob the bank. I just needed the money. I didn't care about you people one way or the other. It's not like I'm malevolent. I'm just, greedy. So there are a lot of faux apologies. I'm just, and also other things like, I cycle, and so sometimes on my way down here, wait, you're rolling your eyes. I cycle, courteously. It's not a bad thing. Oh no, I'm quite fit and vigorous.
But do you wear a helmet?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So sometimes there'll be like, I came down the West Side Greenway, and there's someone like walking in the bike path. There's only this giant pedestrian path right next to it. Texting, and you'll say, I'll say something courteous like, well, all right, it's not always involving cursing. Did I say I meant something, with cursing, and the person will say, oh, sorry, but she's not sorry. That's just a sort of social lubricant that well, if you're sorry, put your cell phone away and go walk on the pedestrian path. So there's you go through the motions, you nominally apologize, but it's not. So I don't know, apologies.
But actually, true repentance would entail that person putting away the cell phone and moving away.
And giving me $10. And so I read the Talmud, which is apparently, very casual.
So I'm wondering, are people more or less unethical today than, there certainly are ways in which ethics have changed or grown in the last 12 years, in the 12 years that you did this, and you talk about this in the book, especially when it gets to technology, and I hope we'll get to that in a moment. But I also just sort of wonder, people say our society is more coarse today and less well-mannered. Do you think that leads to people behaving less ethically, or do you think there's just a sort of a general amount of ethical behavior in any society?
Well, a couple things. That more coarse, that's debatable. Sometimes that just means those young kids with the loud music and the beads and doing the twist all the time. Oh, turn that thing down. That just means we're getting older. It doesn't mean they're not actually getting more coarse. People have been saying this since Socrates. Wasn't Socrates always complaining? There's punks in the agora. They're not like when we were young. It's what a vulgar society. So I challenge that. In the 12 years that I wrote the column, no, there's no societal shift in how moral, at least the people who wrote to me were. But you wouldn't expect to see that either, that cultures don't change in 12 years, not in a profound way, that certain circumstances did change, that there are conditions we found ourselves in at the end of the column that we didn't find ourselves in at the beginning, and they overwhelmingly derive from new technologies. So the moral principles that underpin our behavior, those are the same. But now we find ourselves in circumstances that we don't know, they are different, and it's not entirely clear how people should act. And they fell into two large classes. One was questions having to do with privacy, stemming from Facebook and Google. Stephen Levy's here. He can talk much more eloquently about this. That's his area. So that the first year I wrote the column, someone wrote to me, and she is being set up on a blind date, and she wanted to know if it was okay if she Googled the guy.
Yes.
It's so
That's
sweet.
in the book.
It's so quaint. It's so touching. But the answer was not obvious. That was this too intrusive? Was this prying into some place where he thought, well, was it like hiring a private detective? Now it just seems, I was so foolish. It seems so obvious. If she doesn't Google the guy, she's being a little imprudent, or she's just not that interested in me, and I shouldn't buy her, let her pay for her own drink. So those kind of questions that again, moral principles haven't changed, but what are our expectations of privacy? How do we apply those moral principles? Questions having to do with intellectual property really are thrown up for grabs, and it's because of the internet. Legal and illegal music downloading, kids downloading papers online. I got letter regularly. I ran one. Apparently, clergymen are downloading a lot of bootleg sermons. It's just like, wow.
Hey,
cool. My head is blown.
It's actually true. We actually did a story a couple of weeks ago about a prominent rabbi who actually ended up apologizing for using other.
You're such a fan of the apology.
I know.
Hallmark has a whole line. Sorry, I stole the sermon. I actually think, in a way that the answer to that isn't as obvious as you might think, or at least I hope it seems more complicated to justify my huge ethics paycheck. Yes, of course, you have to acknowledge authorship. Absolutely, because your congregants assume that you're speaking your words, and if you're reading someone else's, you have to let them know. But given that you would do that, it depends on the particular demands of your religion. That in the 19th century, sermons were an enormously lively and popular literary form. There were best-selling books of sermons. And I don't know, maybe you all were more fortunate than I, but what drove me away from Reform Judaism, as much as anything, was my rabbi was really boring. And it wasn't like, my theological crisis at age 17. It's to hear this guy drone on again, it was just unthinkable. And in a way that's terribly unfair, because the demands of that job of clergy in any faith seem impossible. Like, I have to be a brilliant writer and a moving orator and a kind of psychologist to tend to the intimate needs of my congregations, and a business administrator to run this operation that might have a big budget and many employees. Who can do even one of those jobs well? Not me. To expect someone to do all of them seems, it's just impossible. So if I would go to services and someone was reading, here's a brilliant sermon that someone else wrote, and it was acknowledged, I'd much rather hear that. I'm going to read Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech. Great. And then we'll discuss it from a Jewish perspective. Man, that would be great, rather than having this guy try to write. He couldn't write. That's not the worst thing you can say about someone. Now, in some religions, producing a sermon is not essentially a literary act, but a spiritual act. It's a form of communing with God. And God may be omnipotent, but apparently God is not a very good editor in some cases. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that what you're engaged in is that kind of, you go into your study, you shut the door. Apparently Starbucks is mentioned in some significant way, and you grapple with this. That's a religious act, and the results, are they good, are they bad, in a literary sense, don't matter. I pity the congregants. I don't know. I don't think that's so in Judaism, is it?
Well, there's actually a very long tradition in Judaism of citing other people. I mean, the Talmud is all, in the name of so-and-so and so-and-so. So the issue isn't that you would cite other people. In fact, you're thought to be learned if you do that. The issue is if you take those thoughts and don't cite the source.
Right. Oh, no, we agree with that. That's not complicated, although it's tricky where we demand it and where we don't.
That's true.
And the internet exacerbated all these questions that when an actor goes on stage, everyone understands the actor didn't write the play. Mm-hmm. And there's some places where that changes. When a politician gives a talk, we all understand that the politician has speechwriters. There's no deception. No one minds that. But when Lincoln spoke, all through those Lincoln-Douglas debates, well, he wrote that stuff. And it was seen as a requirement of the job, and the people gathered to hear leaders speak. They assumed that they wanted that. That was a very gradual change. The place that still drives me wild is I think ghostwriting is essentially an immoral act, that I think it's indistinguishable from plagiarism, that when the written word is different. The written word, when you sign your name to it, you are not just endorsing those ideas, you're claiming credit. You're claiming authorship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a policy at the Times that if your name's on an op-ed, you wrote it. That we can discuss, well, how much can an editor, what's an editor's role? When does it move into writing? Well, during his presidency, George Bush wrote, and I use the word in quotation marks, 4 op-eds for the New York Times. And I urge you can go look them up, because I'll just say if he wrote them, he has an amazingly variable literary style. That's all I'll say. That the earliest one, it really sounds like him. And in a way, it's the best written of the 4. It's colloquial. It's short sentences. There's something slightly regional about it. Is it brilliant writing? No, but it sounds like the person we came to know and want to see in prison. The later ones, they just sound like this kind of corporate speech. And not only will I bet I have a $1,000 bill in my, well, I don't really, I have a quarter in my pocket, but that not only did he not write them, I'm willing to bet that he didn't read them. So for him to put, and the Times, they're so, they have many, they're the best newspaper in America, and they have many virtues, but they're not exactly gutsy in their intimate dealings with powerful people. And so some poor editor's on the phone, presumably going, well, Mr. President, did you really write this? I mean, I don't envy anyone that task, and I realize it's a very daunting one, and it's not like they're going to go, well, we've compared it to your other work. I mean, he is the president, if, a war criminal. But still, it just used to drive me wild to see his name appended to it, and I thought they're a lot tougher on ordinary people at the paper.
It's true. I mean, it's really an issue that we face.
Really?
Yes, we do. We don't have presidents clamoring to get on the op-ed pages of the Forward, but I must admit. But yeah, there are occasionally times when a public official will pitch you a piece, and certainly I for a time ran the editorial board at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I did encounter this even more frequently.
Well, what do you say to that?
Well, we also would really, really try to make sure that there was something authentic and personal about this. I remember just recently, kind of going back and forth with a press person from a senator's office, saying,
Which one?
Well,
it was Chuck Schumer.
No, it was actually Barbara Boxer.
Tough nut to crack.
Yeah, and just saying, I need something personal in this to make this feel like it's original.
So you were helping them plagiarize more elegantly.
Well, maybe that was it, but we only ran it online. No, but seriously, I do recall, just on a personal aside, one of the mayors that I covered was Bill Green. I'm really dating myself now, but for those of you who know Philadelphia, and he was a very good mayor, but an extremely difficult person when it came to dealing with the press. And after he left being mayor, he wanted to start writing regularly, and I had the distinct pleasure of editing him. And wow, did that feel good. But okay, on to other subjects. I want to talk for a minute about tone. You are a very funny man. You have made a living writing jokes for other people, and there's just something so amusing and sometimes hilarious about some of the things that you posit. And I'm wondering how you calibrate this. How do you bring in humor when you're talking about very serious subjects like ethics? And what happens if you feel like, when do you know if you've gone too far?
well, you know you've gone too far when the reader email starts pouring in calling you a despicable scoundrel, that kind of thing. I mean, the readers do let you know. I would challenge your idea that humor is somehow not serious, that the opposite of funny isn't serious, it's somber, that it's a matter not of import, but as you say, of tone, of rhetorical style, that there is no subject that cannot be treated humorously if you approach it in the proper way and you're skillful enough that, look, we're not the only Jews in this room, and that Jewish humor is all about grappling with the most painful aspects of human life. You know, the more suffering, the better the joke. That it's what assumptions your joke makes, who is the target of the joke. Every joke is an assertion about the world. So humor always seemed appropriate. But the idea that I chose it, like there was some sort of funniness calibration that I would choose, like, oh, I could be much funnier than that, you know, I better hold back a little, just, you know, I just did the best I could, and I wrote in the voice I had. It's believe me, I wasn't holding back the good stuff. That was the good stuff. I was just writing as well as I could.
So this had to do with trying to figure out whether dogs understand language the way that humans do. That this was a man who tricked his dog when the dog ran away. How did you figure out what is the most ethical way to treat an animal? I mean, I'm a dog lover, so I thought this was fascinating.
I did try to pair up, you know, whether or not you can trick your dog might not seem to be of the gravest moral consequences, but since the column was generally 2 questions and 2 answers, I tried to put a graver matter as the first question and something slightly lighter, although the dog might not regard this as light, as the second question. I tried to balance the column. So that's how that ended up in it, unless it was a slow week, and then that was the first question. Questions about animals were always of interest to the readers. As you would get more angry mail if you feel you don't get enough angry mail, write anything about an animal, and no matter how much virtue you require of the animal's companion, I dasn't call it an owner. You haven't done enough. If you say, oh, you should get 2 jobs to support that dog, they'll go, what do you mean 2 jobs? Why not 3 jobs? I mean, the people who care about this stuff really care about it. And I share their view that animals have real moral standing. Animals, they present an interesting array of ethical questions because in some ways we regard them as things, that the law, for instance, treats animals mostly as property. But in other ways, we treat them as living beings with real moral standing, that you can't be cruel to an animal. And we got those first, we humans got those first laws in 18th century England. The first animal cruelty laws were written. This was seen as an amazing and shocking thing. Like, can you, and I believe it was about someone beating a horse in the street was the spark for those first laws. It's my horse, I can do whatever I want with it, just as if it were my car, and if I want to, you know, beat that Buick into the ground, the law can't touch me. This was the first time a law intervened in that way, and it was seen as really shocking. What right does this sound? Does this have any echoes? What right does the government have to tell me what to do with my property? This mammal, this living creature who's capable of suffering. So that once you acknowledge that, then it's, well, what moral standing do animals have? And are they the same as humans? Well, no. If you're in the rowboat and it's, you know, your child or, you know, a lobster. Well, the lobster you can throw overboard. The lobster will swim. Bad example. You know, all right, a kitty cat. I hope you would pick your child, which isn't to say the cat has no moral standing, but we make distinctions. And even there, is a clam the same as a dolphin? Well, no. So on what basis are we making those decisions? Peter Singer is unbelievably eloquent about all this. He's sort of laid the theoretical basis for the animal rights movement. So there's the dog with moral standing, and you think, well, this just seemed an interesting kind of backdoor way to get at it, that it seemed such a frivolous thing. But by answering or grappling with a question like this, it does touch on all that. Well, what moral standing do we grant to animals? How much does a dog have in the kingdom of animals? Is the guy who wrote the question wrongly thinking that he's tricking the dog? Maybe he's not. But when we can trick an animal. You've done that thing. You pretend to throw the ball. We've tricked the dog. Mm-hmm. Is that wrong? Have we given the dog a sort of psychological wound? Because once we say, well, you can't be cruel to an animal, and you ought not. Does that include psychological cruelty? What if I'm, gossiping about the dog behind its back? Do the other dogs tell it? So you have to make judgments about what the animal knows and what the animal can experience. Also, then there's the whole other set of questions about. I think verbal play. Lots of people thought if I say to the dog, "Oh, come on, we're going to the park," but we're really going to the vet. That the dog knows and that you've tricked the dog. I'm not so, and I got a lot of letters from people who they were sending me lists of their dog's vocabulary, English vocabulary. Oh no, my dog understands these 30 words. Well, what are you saying? The dog should go to Kaplan and increase its vocabulary because that dog is not going to do well on the SATs.
Or speak in a different language in front of your dog. This is when Yiddish would have come in handy, maybe.
It would, if you want to trick the dog. And then there's the whole other question that applies to people, too, as well. The reason, as I recall, they were tricking the dog is they have to get the dog home. They have they can't have the dog just wandering the streets, getting liquored up and into fist fights or paw fights. So they do, this person has a duty to the dog, a duty of care to the dog, that voluntarily undertaken but real. And you get the dog home. If all else fails, then, and I think we've done that with, people grapple with that in weightier situations where what must a physician tell a patient or what must a parent tell a child in order to execute that duty of care? Are there times when deception is allowable? And so it was one of the things about the column I really liked, that the question seems silly on the surface, but you start parsing it and it touches on all those things.
I'm going to take questions from the audience in just a moment, but while we're on animals, because there were so many interesting questions here. This one, by the way, from Pittsburgh, was about fur, and it was about this woman who inherited fur coats from her husband's great aunt, and she was trying to figure out what to do with them. And this resonated so strongly with me because I still pay to store my mother's fur coat because I don't want to, I can't throw it out, but I can't wear, I don't know what to do anyhow. So could you talk about that a little bit? Because you got a lot of feedback from readers.
Yeah, nice feedback, interesting feedback. So it was, again, another great thing about the job, or at least as it goes on and you sort of shed the simpler questions. The question about, well, the moral implications of just fur, is fur murder, is fur okay? That's been so discussed in public discourse. Everyone's talking. This is not an unfamiliar question to anyone. This woman sent in this very cool turn on it, which is, well, what if it's a used fur? The animal's already out of the question. This fur, it's 100 years old. Does that change the moral equation? And what possible good would be served? She asked, if I throw this away, some beaver already died for its sins, and the conclusion I came to was that in addition to the immediate harm, an opponent of fur might say this does to the animal, what with killing it. When you wear fur of any origin, you advertise to everyone who sees you that that's okay. That you cannot help but make that statement. And you do not have a sign printed on the back of your coat that says, bought in 1936 by my Aunt Mima, really 9 generations have worn it, and, it was a very bad fox who died of old age. So that I thought, well, if you can find applications for that fur, the used fur that don't advertise that don't make a public statement. You make a throw for your bed. You use it as a lining for another coat. Those kind of things. That was fine. That was admirable. Otherwise, no. I think you needn't become a vegetarian. You needn't be an absolutist to go, well, I'm a wishy-washy liberal. So it's like, let's start, how can we start gradually improving our conduct? Because I do think the vegetarians have the moral high ground here. And so I go, okay, well, I'm wearing, leather shoes and a leather belt. I'm not ready to give up, spare ribs. But I am willing to give up, say, veal. Where it seems particularly cruel. I can start to reform my own. I'm willing to eat less meat. I can start to reform my conduct, even though I can't quite go all the way. And I'm willing to give up fur. I mean, even though I have the legs for it, I'm a tall, slim guy, I look really good in a fur coat. But I'm secure in my manhood. I can pull that look off. But I think I ought not, so I'm willing to give that up. And then you shouldn't advertise that it's okay to wear fur, flows from that, even a used fur. And I asked the readers to send in suggestions. Well, what did they do? And they had all kinds of cool ideas. Somewhere, I think it was even folks from PETA who said they accept old furs and they're shredded up and used as bedding for injured wild animals or injured rescued animals. Yeah. People had lots of ingenious uses.
Did you often get ideas from readers?
I got ideas about how wrong I was from readers. Yeah. I mean, in a way, another aspect of the job that was great was that I felt I was running a kind of salon. And then I would present a little moral problem. I would say, here's what I think constitutes right conduct. But these are complicated questions, and I only had 650 words to take on, too. So I knew I was kind of oversimplifying for a living. And the readers would, with a very generous spirit, respond and go, here's another aspect of it you might consider, or here's a flaw in your logic. That was really fun. That was really fun. These were problems we were all trying to solve together, and that's a consequence of the internet. That because of email, that becomes really possible. It changes the relationship of writer to reader from something where you make a declaration and then maybe a month later you get a letter, but you've forgotten what that was. You're on to other things, to where it's instant and much more conversational and quite wonderful.
Oh, that's great. Please, now, do we have questions here? Would you like to come and speak in front of the microphone, or we'll just repeat them? Yes, the woman in the blue.
Lisa Semple, married to your former colleague. I'm asking this question about the presidential campaign, which I'm finding disturbing beyond. Okay. I'm finding the present presidential campaign extremely disturbing in a way that I can't remember ever experiencing. Romney's statement about how it was not his job to care about 46% of the population. Now, do you have any explanation for how a person could say that, running for office?
I think that might be less a question for an ethicist than for a psychiatrist. And apparently that's what Mr. Romney's campaign people think. Why would he say that? Science is baffled. I don't know. I don't know how he would say that. I will say that I speaking for myself as a social parasite, I came down here on a public road. And I was breathing air that was kept clean by environmental rules. My daughter went to a fine public high school not far from here. I'm deeply ashamed of my crippling dependency on the government. And the other, I thought, interesting thing he said is people have an expectation. They act like they have a right, what was it, to food, to housing, and to medical care. I confess I'm guilty of that. I do think I'm entitled to all three of those things, and I intend to eat a big meal with my doctor indoors.
Do you think that there's some sort of kind of ethical way of judging candidates coming from your question there? I mean, are we? Is it fair to judge a candidate for every single thing that comes from his or her mouth?
Yes. Yeah, the short answer is yes. Not only is it fair to do it, it's an obligation of citizenship to do it, to try to form a coherent picture of the people we're obliged to choose. For us to run the country, so that you have to, and you have to understand that yes, people make slips of the tongue. People say things that don't actually reflect their beliefs. People tell lies. People deceive. It's a challenging thing. But you know what? It's not all that challenging. I like when parties are ideological. Parties are supposed to be ideological. It's asking too much of an ordinary person like me to have a sophisticated theory of tax policy. I'm not an economist. What do I know? But say it was England and it's 1955. Given my values, given my place in the world, I go, well, I'm going to vote Labour because I know that party articulates my concerns and is attempting to find solutions to problems with my interests at heart. That's a good thing. If you were, a rich person, and it was 1962, you could be a Rockefeller Republican. That a very great man named Karl Marx understood. You were pursuing your legitimate interests. And that's what politics is in a good sense. In a better sense, we rise above our narrow concerns and think about the country as a whole. But what's so baffling to me is that people who make less than $500,000 a year vote for candidates who advocate, say, tax policies that only benefit you when you make more. That's where I think we transcend ethics entirely into like moon man problems.
Yes, sir.
I have an art blog, and I use steal, if you want to use the word, images from the internet, from galleries and museums. There's no way I could post things with getting the proper copyright laws passed. It would, for one thing, take too long. It would be out of date, and I don't see any real harm that comes to it. I always credit when I can. So I don't think it's unethical, do you?
This whole area of intellectual property laws is really, it's really thrown up for grabs. Because it used to be, 25 years ago, pre-internet, if someone you would have been putting out like a small newspaper, and it would have had much less reach, and so you would have printed 4 smudgy copies, on cheap paper, and it just wouldn't have had the impact to bother anybody. The internet suddenly gives you a much greater reach and access to this huge array of images. I share your view that if I understand the kind of publication you're putting out, you harm no one, and believe that the copyright laws, as now written, are completely overreaching, partly because they were written for a different set of conditions, but partly because to enrich the Walt Disney Company. That the original period of copyright in the Constitution, Article 8, Section 1, was, I'm not a lawyer, was 14 years. And now it's the life of the creator plus. So I think that's slightly over. The idea of copyright is not to enrich the grandchildren of the person who wrote Happy Birthday to You, a song still enjoying copyright. No one connected to the drawing of Mickey Mouse is alive. So the idea of copyright was to promote the exchange of ideas, to promote science and the useful arts. The idea was you give people a monopoly on their own ideas for a limited time. That's the language that's used, so that they can make a living. People have an incentive to create things while they're designing a new plow. They get to make their money back, and encourages everyone to generate ideas, but only for a limited time do they get that monopoly, because we want those ideas to be in wide circulation, so we're a nation of innovation. By continuing to extend copyright, and every time the copyright law is about to, copyright law is about to expire, it's extended, and the most recent version is the Sonny Bono Copyright Extension Act, and a name that evokes high moral purpose. So this is all a long-winded way of saying that the law hasn't caught up to the internet, and I think what you're doing is probably illegal, but I don't think it's immoral.
May I,
Does
may
that
I
agree
just
with-
may I just add though another perspective on this? I mean, I very much sympathize with you. We deal with this literally 100 times a day because you know, and we have a newspaper here, but we have more than twice this amount of content online that gets updated all the time. And you know, a rule of thumb with anything online, a blog post, a story, an editorial, is that it's best if it has an image with it. So we pay for services, you know, that give us images, since I can't afford to have full-time photographers on my staff. But we definitely come into this issue all the time. And I sympathize with you tremendously. But if I may, from the other perspective, there's, and I don't know whether this is actual copyright or just unethical behavior or impolite behavior, but it is so common for websites to publish in full someone else's work. I mean, honestly, Arianna Huffington would just be, you know, another, what was she before she created Huffington Post?
Rich man's wife.
Rich man's wife. If she didn't, I have to say, steal so much content. I've had things published on the Huffington, but is it not? I mean, the artists created something and spent a great deal of time trying to create that painting or the sculpture or whatever it is, the image you have. And that's the result of that person's creation. And it's a result.
How does it harm the artist for me to publicize this work?
Well, you could say that, but you could also say that maybe the artist wants to have control over the images of his or her work, and that it might be up to the artist to decide that. And certainly, as a writer, it's a balancing act, and the reason I give permission to the Huffington Post to publish some of my editorials is because I do want the publicity. I'll admit it. But I'll also admit that I already got paid to write it. There are a whole lot of people out there that are doing this for either for nothing, that's another story, or there are many, many websites that just simply repeat in full other content. And then it does almost amount to stealing. I mean, we're not getting anything.
Aggregators, I think, are clearly immoral. Unethical anyway.
Well, some aggregate and they'll have a paragraph and then link back to the full story. I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
But when taking the whole thing, so this is also something that we could never have imagined 25 years ago, and it's one of the big sort of. I know in journalism, it's a very big ethical concern.
I would add two things. One is that it doesn't hurt the creator. I'm okay with your conclusion, but not with how you got there. That it doesn't hurt the creator argument's not persuasive to me. That's a free rider argument. That, you know, if one more person gets on the subway without paying his fare, well, it doesn't slow the train down. It doesn't impose any cost. It doesn't hurt the transit authority. But unless everyone pays their fair share, the system collapses. You're a free rider, and that's I wouldn't use that argument. I would suggest that one possible reform is one that makes distinctions between who is using the work. That you're a much bigger, you know, you're like a noble institution, and the Forward, and you have a bigger budget, I dare say, than he has for his paper. So that one kind of reform is to have tiers of payment, depending on how
That's
it's used.
Yes.
I think that shows up in like what you pay to use someone's play. If you're going to put on, if you're a little amateur theater, you pay a very small amount. If you're a great big theater,
Actually, you
pay
know,
more.
the Associated Press works that way.
Yeah,
You pay more to be a member of the AP and to use their material, the bigger your circulation.
Yeah, and the other thing that's necessary is the system has to be convenient to use, so that it can't take weeks to, you know, through some lengthy negotiation to get consent to use it, or people aren't going to muck around with that. But those seem like solvable problems with the will to solve them, and yet I completely agree that people are entitled to be paid for their work. But working out a mechanism to do that doesn't stifle a community of ideas, that's pretty challenging.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you.
One last question.
Yes, ma'am?
I enjoyed reading your column all those years.
Thank you.
And I would like to know where the division of amorality, amoral, and immoral breaks down, and how the raiders of Wall Street continue to go without consequence, and should we just stuff our money under the mattress?
Wait, what was it? I was put the money on.
Should
Well,
we
I don't
just
give
put money
financial.
into them? I
I
mean,
don't
it's-
give
it's
financial
loaded.
advice.
It's a lot.
Although I would sell you some gold if you, like Glenn Beck. I do have a little gold trading operation. Why people who cause immense suffering on the grand scale are not held accountable for their actions? I believe power is the answer to that. That the country's run by that's who runs the country. For me, we as long as we're raising that question, well, why did Obama, a man I voted for and will vote for again, why did he say we're not going to prosecute the people who tortured? Because those crimes took place in the past. I believe he said we're only going to prosecute future crimes that take place, on the surface of the moon. What did he say? So that the unaccountability, well, yeah, it breaks my heart every day. Sure, I don't have an answer. Is it right? No, it's not right. Does it go on? Yes, all the time. Mm-hmm. Immoral and amoral.
Illegal too.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, thank you. And I have one last question, if we have time. Not just a question, but you talk in the book in two different places, in two different ways, about David Letterman. Both one in terms of the sort of ethics surrounding a particular joke that he made.
Yeah.
And
Palin joke.
yeah, and then also just about workplace rules.
Well, having
and
affairs with people that work for you, yeah.
Yes, and so I was just wondering if you could share a little bit of your experiences of working with him beyond that.
They were great. It was just like a dream job. I mean, I'd never worked in television before, or even aspired to work in television. It was sort of quirky that I was looking for work, and I was like some stupid rookie getting drafted by a World Series team. My Brainiac friends watched the show. This was in 1984, early 84. My deadbeat quasi-literate friends watched the show. My genius friends watched the show. Everybody watched the show. The show had the same sort of cultural centrality that Jon Stewart does now, I think. And you were given the things people want in any job. Like, you were given a chance to do work you're proud of. Well, already, like, how rare is that? You might, not every day did you fulfill that opportunity, but it was possible. You were treated with courtesy and respect. You were made to feel your work was valued, and every day you went down to the studio, trained circus animals and glamorous actresses. These are the things everyone wants in their working life, and it was it just seemed astonishing to have it. I went to work every day. I mean, it was high pressured, and I always felt I was about to be fired. Everyone seemed smarter and funnier. So it was tense. I mean, it was a daily show. The light would go on, they were going to put it on. So I had to learn how to do that. But boy, I had two completely life-changing jobs, and it was getting to write for the Times and getting to write for Dave. And I'm pathetically grateful for both.
Do you still watch the show?
No, and I haven't read the column since I've left either. You can't really. You can't. Once you're very inside the thing, like this must have happened to other people in the room. Like, you've left a job, and okay, so a couple of months later you go back to visit. Well, you can do that once. And then, like, they've moved on, that you don't quite get the office conversation. Their concerns have shifted. You don't work there. You're not a part of that community anymore. And so to watch it from, maybe twice a year, if I'm up late, I'll flip it on and I'll see, boy, he's been at it for what? It's like more than 30 years. It's amazing. What show is on for 30 years that he keeps the quality as high as he? I mean, I have incredible respect for Dave and gratitude, but no, I don't watch it. It's moved on.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane and Randy, and thank you all for coming. Randy's going to stick around and sign books, so you can continue chatting with him out there.
I'll sign any book, by the way, and then if you brought like Moby Dick, I do a really good mail. But only dead writers. I won't.